So this is the last keynote talk of the summer school. So then right after we have the sessions with a presentation of the hands-on, and then we have the awards. So the VPH Best Poster Award and the Best Hands-on Award. And then this afternoon, there is a cardio function workshop. So for those who don't know, cardio function is an industrial European doctorate, Marie Curie action, that is coming to its end. And then this afternoon there is a presentation of the final results of this network. So it's definitively of great interest for all people. And then I encourage everyone to stay for this workshop, and then to see the result of how interaction between academia and industry has created values in models. But Bart.
Importantly, also afterwards, there's a panel discussion more on issues regarding to PhDs, which are not necessarily the research itself, but more how research is done and how especially interdisciplinary research with industry, engineers, and medical doctors is done. So if you want to know more, then come there.
Great. I think it's perfect integration, so as basically what the summer school is. Practical stuff, attendance certificates. So many of you need attendance certificates. They're all outside on the registration desk. They're all signed. So you will get it in exchange if you give back the evaluation form. Okay? we want to be evaluated. That's very important because the idea is then to repeat the event. So your evaluation is very important. Okay. So now we'll start. So that's my pleasure then to welcome Mark van Gils. So Mark van Gils is a senior researcher at VTT Research Finland. So he will surely introduce VTT Research Finland better than I. But very generally, so VTT Research Finland is a publicly funded non-public institution. Yeah. And so the very interesting thing is that they're basically the link between technology transfer, industry, and research at university. So basically they have very tight links with both parts of the pipeline, from research to industrial innovation. And then they're doing their own research. So Mark has more than 25 years of experience in artificial intelligence and machine learning, so applied to health data, healthcare systems. And so from what I know from his work, so from previous collaboration, writing project together, trying to get money, so that the very nice thing is that it's not only purely about black box artificial intelligence. So it's also then looking at the meaning of the data and looking at how machine learning actually links different data with different meaning in order then to extract some maybe not fully mechanistic descriptors, but at least interpretable descriptors of that. And yeah, so Mark, the word is yours.
Thank you very much, Jerome, for this good introduction and, of course, for allowing me to be here at this very nice event. It's really, I learn a lot. It's really very, very nice. So yes, you already gave a very good introduction about VTT, but maybe just a few words. So VTT, the abbreviation is a Finnish version, which I will not pronounce here, but it's Technical Research Center of Finland, and we are basically, it was founded after the Second World War with the mission to support Finnish industry with research and development services. So that's where we came from, and actually that's what we still do. But of course now the industry that we support is not only Finland, but especially Europe on a wider scale. And we have around 2,500 people working there. Most of them are researchers, a large part PhD and master's students also. Sometimes we take them in and train them as researchers and they continue their career then. So it's very much, well, research that we are doing, but more applied research, I would say, than the typical universities do, where the fundamental part is, of course, stronger. So we really interact a lot with industry and try to understand what are the practical needs and then try to link between the universities and industry to really get something working. So if you want to make comparisons, our sister institutions in Europe are, for example, Fraunhofer in Germany and TNO in the Netherlands and that kind of institutions. So it's technical work that we do, and of course we have many different areas that we are working. So we have those 2,500 people. Some of them are working in industrial automation, some of them are working in biology, chemistry. Pulp industry is of course big in Finland, and my responsibility is then the healthcare, so-called citizen-centric care research area that I coordinate in VTT as a research professor, and I also, as an additional job, I'm teaching signal processing, biomedical signal processing courses at Aalto University in Helsinki. So the main research that I'm kind of working on and have been working on for the last 20 years has to do with decision support in healthcare, and maybe shortly describing what it is. So we are not aiming to, let's say, take over jobs of clinicians or doctors, but it's really helping to make them sense out of very complex data. So the point is there is all kinds of data that you can measure. You have maybe images, genetic tests, lab tests, interviews with patients, lots of different forms of data. And then the question is, some of this it's conflicting, some of it's not complete, some of them has errors. How can we then help doctors understand that kind of information to make more informed decisions? So it's really about value-based things were already mentioned earlier this morning. So that second bullet there is faster decision-making, more confidence especially is what we are looking at. So it's really providing tools for difficult situations, and difficult situations in this case are difficult diseases where it's not obvious for a doctor what actually the diagnosis are or what kind of action should be taken. So you could think, for example, maybe a person comes to a doctor and he has a kind of tremor. It could be related to Parkinson's, but it could be also related to some completely different type of disease that requires a completely different type of intervention. So what to do? We will see quite many examples of, for example, dementia-related issues today. There are all kinds of symptoms like forgetting things and being confused, but those type of symptoms can be the origin of many different types of diseases that really require completely different types of interactions. And if you ask Dr. A or Dr. B, they might have completely different opinions. So what happens is that they will collect data and maybe once in a week sit together in a committee and try to come to some kind of compromise, saying, okay, this is this type of dementia or that type of dementia or something else. So this type of really difficult things where we really require experts that are expensive. We want to take out a lot of their routine job and really have them save time and concentrate more on the things that they are good at, instead of having to fill in all kinds of administrative forms and do kind of things around the work that are not really decision-making related. So decision-making and decision support, there are many things that we could do when we think about what kind of decisions need to be made in a clinical setting. There's actually quite a long list, and this is by no means complete. So we could think about, okay, can we assess the risk that a person might develop a cardiac disease or dementia or diabetes? And there we are really looking in things like preventing and trying to interact as early as possible. Early diagnostics is then the phase where we have certain subtle symptoms, but it's not sure what the disease actually is. We don't have enough information normally yet, but we really would like to shift that decision to earlier moments. Differential diagnostics has to do with the fact that we have quite many different types of diseases that are family of each other, but are different, and I will show some examples of different forms of dementia there. So it's really separating between is it disease A or disease B or the disease C or disease D. So what kind of choice do we need to make there? Sometimes we want to monitor patients in a hospital and follow how they are doing over time and maybe predict when the situation is worsening. That's a difficult issue in, for example, intensive care unit sessions. Patient stratification has to do with finding the right group, trying to divide patients in different groups that maybe require different types of interaction. So to say, okay, this type of medicine works for this type of patients and this type of medicine works for those type of patients. Intervention planning, you get a patient in the hospital and you would need to decide, is it safe to operate this person, or do we observe for a moment and see how the situation develops, or do we need to make an MRI, or is that maybe overkill? So what kind of treatment paths do we need to make? So that's another decision to make. Sometimes we want to monitor how the treatment is going, so we give certain medications, or we have done an operation and we would like to see whether this medication now actually has effect, yes or no, or is the patient situation worsening due to some reasons. So there we are following over time what is going on and try to extract information from the data. And sometimes we really want to actually save costs at the hospital level. Actually, that's quite an important part where resource planning is important. So do we expect that this patient might need an operation that we need to schedule? Do we need to call in staff from a certain thing, or can we maybe add some other monitoring that is more or less expensive? Do we need to maybe use teleconsultation, those type of things that are then also decision making on the basis of the data that we have here in this hospital that we can measure? Cost effectiveness is there a part also, so it's really high level decision making. And then finally, that bullet point at the bottom there is really not having the doctor as the decision making, but persons themselves, which is more and more important in the sense that we want to avoid that people get ill in the first place. So there we have our wearables, devices at home, maybe apps that can measure things like your activity, maybe your daily behavior patterns, and try to give feedback on how you are doing, maybe whether it's wise to move a bit more or look at your sleep patterns and those type of things. So that's really a rising type of area, but it would be a completely own presentation there. So today I will talk about those three first bullets there and show some examples there. So the area that we are working in is really much more data-driven than the presentations that have been here at the summer school until now, but it's really, we are not an isolated group, of course. So this is a picture that actually is representing an EU project that we did, which was VPH there, which was led by Alex Frangi some years ago, where we actually were active in this area. So we have there the issue that we would like to develop decision support for dementias, so detect earlier when persons have dementia and provide the right interactions, the treatment plans, which is then really at the top. So we have data at the bottom, and we would like to have some smart decision making there for healthcare professionals or for researchers to learn from how dementia manifests itself in the body and processes, or for patients and citizens to give feedback on what kind of things are risky and how to change or lower the risk. So in between there are two paths there. So there's the left side, which is of course all very well known and has been discussed in many components here. So the modeling approach, and okay, Alex there technically for the proposal funding told that mechanistic modeling and phenomenological modeling, the right part is basically where we're working on. In probably if we would write this proposal today, it might be more funding interesting to call it machine learning or something like that, because it's a bit more trendy word now. But the whole idea is we have data-driven approaches there, and we have modeling approaches there, and we all work together basically to generate hypotheses and test them, look at associations, generate interesting input for the models, and the models of course then need parameters that we maybe can get from the data that we measure and analyze. So it's really different groups there. So in total there were around 20 partners, a bit more even if I remember correctly, that really interact a lot with each other and really communicate. So it's not an isolated work here that we are doing. And I will show today a few examples of different projects. So we really at VTT we do a lot of projects. It's basically our main modus of operandi. So to give you an idea, roughly 30% of our budget comes from the state funding. So it's basically the Finnish government funds that directly. So it's for basic research and improving our own competences. But 30% comes from the European Union or local Finnish government funding, and then 30% is direct subcontracting from companies who want to do confidential research with us and really say, okay, this is something that you can sort out, but we don't publish it and we do it directly with them. So this is now a list of European projects that we worked on in the past few years, and so a group related to dementias and a group related to traumatic brain injury. So I tell a bit about both cases, and quite many of them were actually funded in the VPH Framework 7 program. So Predict AD, VPH DR, Predict ND, and TBI Care are all related to VPH program, and 3 of them we actually coordinated ourselves. So Predict AD, Predict ND, and TBI Care were coordinated by us, and basically we really used them to develop certain methods, and as a kind of business plan thing that we discussed also earlier this morning, actually we of course generated lots of publications, but also a spin-off company, which was one concrete result from getting all that work done. So let's zoom into maybe the first group of projects related to dementias. So the whole idea is there that we really have a difficult group of diseases. So the best known form of dementia is Alzheimer's dementia, which takes around 70% of the dementia cases, but then there are lots of other forms of dementia, like vascular dementia and frontal temporal lobe dementia and Lewy body dementia, that are also forms of dementia with similar types of symptoms, but that require a completely different type of action from a doctor. So then the question is, how can we find, if a person comes to a clinic, how can we find out what kind of dementia it actually is? And it really requires a strong expertise, so it's not something that a junior doctor usually does, and it requires discussion between different expert doctors. And as a result of that, it takes a long time before somebody comes to the doctor, to the memory clinic, saying, okay, I have memory problems, or usually their family encourages them to go then. And the moment that they actually get a diagnosis, it's on average around 20 months in Europe, and in other countries it actually is even longer, or they actually never get the diagnosis at all. So it's really an issue, because as long as there is no diagnosis, there are no kind of interventions planned. We don't have a medicine to cure dementia, but we do have interventions to slow down the progress. So it actually would be very, very cost effectiveness and also quality of life improving if we can really provide the right treatment at the right moment to avoid that the quality of life decreases fast. So that's the idea. You want to detect problems as early as possible and do the right thing as early as possible. So today, if we are looking at those type of disorders regarding cognition, then technology is of course advancing and there's lots of things happening. So MRI images are being used more, and we have automatic methods that calculate all kinds of structures and volumes and connections and evaluations over time, especially MRI. PET scans are even more sensitive, but they are also very expensive, so it's not something that you want to use in a screening setting, but sometimes to make the final decision they are used. But it's really, of course, traditionally those type of interpretations have been done by visual, looking at the data more and more. We have automatic methods, and there have been many examples already shown, and the next slide will probably show a little bit more of those, but those are really being used more and more. And there we have machine learning and artificial intelligence as tool coming up quite fast. But in practice still, that bottom bullet point there is, it's rarely so that a doctor looks at a complete holistic picture of a patient and takes all the type of information into account for making a decision. It's quite often single modality and looking at those variables and how they relate to the reference populations of healthy or diseased patients. So the trick is then, can we make computer-based methods that combine everything together and help really to make better decisions there. And we can do that. Of course, we have our data-driven tools, our nice machine learning tools, etc. But there are some kind of requirements. We cannot just use any method if we want to really hope to take it up in clinical practice. So there's certain demands. First of all, we really don't want to have kind of classifiers or methods that say, okay, this person has a disease, yes or no, without giving any further information. So it really has to be a typical graded outcome, indicate probabilities of how sure you are about this classification and what are the margins of the outcome there. So it really needs to be a refined output. It should not be a black box approach if we make this type of decisions, but understandable. And understandable, I'm not referring to data scientists, but I'm referring to people that don't have technical strong background there. So maybe senior doctors, but also more and more junior doctors, and sometimes even nurses that are really using those type of tools in routine things. So it's not really a good idea to make a very high dimensional plot or those type of things that are very difficult to interpret for people that are not acquainted with those type of things. Integration of data is really essential if we want to have a combined view of the person. That's clear, but it really requires quite a lot of coupling of databases and formats and interaction, and it's really a lot of handwork, in fact. So it sounds maybe not so scientifically interesting, but it's in practice an enormous amount of work. Individualized is important, so it's nice to know that on average the hippocampus volume of people with dementia is smaller than people without dementia, but it doesn't really tell very much to person A when he visits a doctor. He or she wants to know what actually it means for him or her. So we have personalized models. We know that things vary with age, with gender, with certain lifestyles, so how to kind of correct for those type of factors that are so-called confounding factors or affect the personal risks. So that's a very big issue. Realities is an important one also. So even if we say we want to combine all the data and hope that we have MRIs and maybe sometimes CT scans and lab values and genetic information and memory tests, the practice is that quite often there is missing data. Maybe devices might not be working, or they are not available, or there is something wrong. It costs too much to do a certain measurement. So there's always in our matrices that we have, there are gaps, and many fancy machine learning methods actually, they require that the data is complete. So what you can do is you can start imputing or making up data, but it's not always allowed or a good idea to do that, because you are really altering the contents of the data. So what we prefer is methods that actually inherently work with data vectors that are having missing values. And then it really needs to be usable, so you need to implement it in some software that is user-friendly, that is understandable. So visualizations that are understandable to look at is really an important issue as well. So it's not necessarily a technical classification issue, but really usability. So those dementia-related tools that we have, so actually they have two main components. So one is really looking at the image analysis component, extracting feature there automatically, and the other then is combining the image data with all the other data that we have. So those are the main, let's say, the main parts of the work. And I'm going to go skipping a bit over those image analysis things, because this is quite a lot of work actually that I guess Daniel Ruckert, when he was here on Tuesday, has been going through, because Daniel has been working in all those projects that I just listed with us. So basically their group has especially those units and CNN-based things for vascular burden there, but also the manifold-based learning has been developed by them, and we then at VTT, we have been looking more at multi-atlas based approaches, structural approaches of MRI analysis. So there's lots of different things that you can extract from MRI images, and we have used and developed in those EU projects many methods there. So they are actually then calculating and providing hundreds of different features from the MRI area. So that's one set of features. But then of course we have our memory tests, we have our maybe metabolomics, proteomics, genetic information, so all kinds of things that we then would like to analyze at the same time. And how do we do that? Well, in practice we are using a rather simple approach there, saying, okay, we collect lots of data, so we have maybe retrospective data, but we also have prospective data from different hospitals throughout Europe, and we then say, okay, we know from those data that certain people who have followed over time, some of them did have dementia, some of them didn't. Sometimes you know it after years of follow-up, sometimes the final outcome is really after pathological examination, but the point is here that we have distributions. Let's say that for a similar or a simple example, we have the blue distribution is a database probability density function type of approximation of the speed of which people did a memory test. So people that didn't have dementia had a favorable outcome and they were pretty fast, so they had a short time of completing that test, and people that did have dementia were slower and they had a non-favorable outcome. And okay, it's an outer distribution there, so it's more to the right. And now we have a person coming into the clinic, the orange vertical line there, and we would like then to say, okay, we do the test with you, we measure how fast you do it, and it appears that you are very fast. You fall into a measure that is pretty clearly into that blue distribution. It's lower than all the people that have dementia, because the dementia orange distribution is completely to the right there. So we then say, okay, the probability on the basis of this data that we have that you belong to that dementia group is 0, which is then on the right there in that blue box. The blue box is blue because it falls completely in the blue distribution. And what now happens if we would have different people that have different performance, they may be performing slower with those tests, is that those values then are getting more to the orange side. So the more and more you fall into that right-hand side, the more and more it's likely that you belong to that orange population, and we can give that color a red color there. So it's a kind of, it's simple. The mathematical representation is on the right there. It's related to kind of probabilities, but it's corrected to make it a monotonous function and easily, especially easily interpretable for doctors and quickly looking at how things go. So it's an index between 0 and 1 saying where you are in that distribution, and a visualization component there. And another thing that we then look at is how those distributions actually relate to each other. So if we have a biomarker that is not really different for people that have dementia or that don't have dementia, then it's not a very powerful feature. So we say, okay, it's nice to have, but it doesn't really, we cannot really make much decisions on it. On the other hand, if we have in our database really the indication that those type of distributions are different, so it's kind of related to statistical testing p-values, you could say, we visualize this by a bigger box size. And what you then get in the end, if you combine things, is that you have for each variable an index value between 0 and 1, a color, and a box size that you then all put together and say, okay, for each variable there, we have on the right-hand side lots of observations there. And so there are neurocognitive, let's see. So there are neuropsychological tests here, SERAT tests and memory tests. Then there are MRI features there. There is cerebral spinal fluid, and there's genetic information there at the bottom. And what you can see now quickly here is that those most variables indicate that this person belongs to the AD group. So what we have here now is a distribution of hippocampus volumes of people with Alzheimer's disease and people without Alzheimer's disease, and the yellow person is what we would like to make a diagnosis about. And it looks that this person is more related to the Alzheimer group, which is then also reflected in the colors there and the sizes of the boxes. We are pretty sure of that. Genetic information says that it's maybe the other way around, but on the other hand, it's a very small box, so we don't pay very much attention to that. And the cerebral spinal fluid doesn't really give any conclusive direction one way or the other. So this is a very quick overview, and you can calculate those indices for all those things individually, but you can then make a weighted sum of those index values with the box sizes and make a weighted combination of them and add them together as an MRI index or a neurophysiological index, and then calculate that iteratively upwards to a total disease state index. So it's kind of going upwards, and the whole idea is that here that it should be really understandable, but it should also, of course, perform numerically and classification-wise well. So that's the whole idea. And this is the visualization component really has been developed from the start up with clinicians to say, okay, this is something that we would like to use and we can really nicely understand it, and you can integrate it in a computer program, and then you can actually do it interactively, showing maybe the tree size at a very high level first and then clicking on it and delving deeper into the MRI and looking into the hippocampus values and really going into detail if you would like to explore what kind of variables have what kind of indications there. So in practice, what we do is we collect lots of data, I already mentioned a few of those, and then really see how we can compare that in existing data, but of course those databases grow as we collect more data, so we make it smarter as we go along. And so the trick is then to say, okay, we define a hierarchical tree of variables, so we have the total index, which is then maybe having neuropsychological tests, like all kinds of things that you could do, the mental state examination or the Cambridge cognitive test. We have cerebral spinal fluid observations, we have MRI features, tensor-based, volume-based, manifold learning, all those things that I just showed, and combine them all together into some kind of overall index. And you can implement that then in a computer program, and this is actually a screenshot of a service that we have developed. So there, as I mentioned, we have a spin-off company from these EU projects, which is really commercially putting this thing on the market, so really having it in use in clinical practice. So what you see on the right-hand side is here the raw data. Clinicians would like to see what are the actual values that have been measured. We see those fingerprints that I've been shown, and you then see also the distributions, because it's nice to see this visualization, but the distributions in the database are really important to have there. And of course you then can say, okay, let's if this is a classifier, how does it then actually compare to other classifiers? So this is a very quick, let's say, check in comparisons to basic other types of measures like support vector machines, Bayesian classifiers, random forest classifiers, and you can see actually that the classification performance, if you look at the ROC curve, it really doesn't matter very much. All those methods are pretty much overlapping. What actually is different is that this disease state index that we have here is really giving a graded output. So we have here normal patients, stable, mild cognitive impairment, so people with slight memory complaints, but they are more due to normal aging than to having a disease. We have progressive memory complaints, or mild cognitive impairment, sorry, so people that have small memory problems, but those actually will develop to dementia, and then we have people with actual full Alzheimer's dementia here. And you can see that disease state index actually gives a nice graded output there if we really train it like that, whereas by nature, for example, a support vector machine and Bayes and also logistic regression, they are developed so to put it either to that category or to that category, so that the graded outcome there is much less visible, which is really something that clinicians in this case demanded and would like to have, that it's really a graded type of index that evolves with the severity of the patient state. So that's one strong thing there. So performance-wise, maybe purely there isn't much difference, but if you really want to explore and understand what is going on, then that disease state index is what we prefer to use there. And then there are many examples. I will not go into much detail about those, but here are 4 cases that were followed over 4 years. All of them had mild cognitive impairment, so certain slight memory problems. 2 of them stayed stable over the 4-year follow-up, and 2 of them actually developed after a few years to full Alzheimer. And these type of things were now calculated at the baseline, so at the very first observation. So the whole trick is, can you then separate people that will develop into dementia from people that will not develop into dementia? So you can see this example here is very nice because it's completely blue, and indeed it didn't develop to dementia. This is clearly a person who is at risk of developing to dementia, and indeed he also did so. More interesting from a research point of view are those in-between cases where there are conflicting things between an MRI and certain neuropsychological tests, for example. What is actually going on there? Those are really the interesting questions to explore. But you can see that the principle really works pretty nicely, and it shows which variables are important for classification purposes. You can make longitudinal versions of that following over time. So if you have a person that you, for example, do tests with every 6 months, you can see how those indices develop over time, and in this case then have some kind of regression curves in which say, okay, for this person actually the disease state index is slowly or actually fast going from a small value to a higher value, indicating that there is really a risk that this person is going towards the dementia area. For this case, actually it stayed much more stable. So then the question is, at which point can you start inferring that this person is now in the wrong group and you need to do something? That's the longitudinal analysis type of problem there. Then, of course, that Alzheimer versus healthy is one area, but actually what we have then further been working on quite a lot is separating between different forms of dementia. So it's really then saying, okay, we have, for example, frontal dementia, we have Lewy body dementia, vascular dementia, Alzheimer's dementia, or maybe people that have memory problems, but they are not related to dementia. How do we know which is which? So there we then have many. It's really a multi-class type of classification problem there. It's not controls versus disease, but disease A versus B versus C. So what we do there is really then we have those classifications on a pair-by-pair basis. So frontal dementia versus subjective memory complaints, frontal dementia versus vascular dementia, frontal dementia versus Lewy body dementia, etc., etc. And you can click on all those things there and do those calculations. And basically you could then choose or looking at which index is the highest. But typically we use then combinations and really explore it interactively to see what is going on. So this is really very much a tool for clinicians to try out hypotheses and looking at different possibilities and exclude certain diseases more objectively. Okay, some numbers there. So it's, if you look at those confusion matrices there that are, then you would of course would like to have everything on that axis there, but in practice of course you never get that. But nevertheless, a balanced accuracy of around 82%, which is really very good. But actually what we really would in practice then look more at is really excluding and detecting cases that are obvious. So when the DSI is really very high, you are pretty sure that that classifier is correct there because it's such a convincing output. So there you actually then can start improving the performance quite a lot. But really stressing that we can make those confusion matrices and we can do those calculations, but it's not necessarily the main point here. It's really providing tools for interacting and looking at what kind of disease signatures there are. You can calculate it and compare it to more advanced things that are like a moment ago I showed the support vector machines, etc. There's of course nicer methods like AdaBoost and RustBoost that work a bit more, let's say, the more state of the art. Actually the performance is pretty much the same. For some of the separate variables, those boosting methods work a bit better. So like if you take purely the neuropsychological tests or purely the cerebral spinal fluid, then boosting methods work a bit better, but it's really the differences are rather small. And as I said, interpretability is what we kind of favor here as main point. Then, of course, it's important to see, okay, what kind of variables are most influencing the outcome there. So if you group those variables into, let's say, big main groups like cognitive tests and spinal fluid and MRI images, and you just use classifiers having those type of inputs only, then you get, for certain differential diagnostics, you get already pretty good performance. So for example, separating controls from something else, so healthy people from something else, actually those cognitive tests work pretty well. You don't really necessarily need very much of advanced measurements there. But then if you are really going into the more difficult things like comparing Alzheimer's option versus frontal dementia or frontal dementia with vascular dementia, then in this case cerebrospinal fluids are more. So if you have, say, okay, I want to compare AD option versus somebody else, those are more important there. MRIs are good overall. They are actually performing quite well over the whole range, but of course costing more than, for example, having a simple cognitive test, but nevertheless, if you want to have high performance, they are good. And then, of course, if you combine everything together, you really get the best performance over the whole range. So this is really one of the arguments to say, okay, we really need to have the holistic picture there, because that really gives us extra information. All the information is complementary in this case. So that's really good to know which type of measurements are contributing how much, and for cost effectiveness assessment actually it's really important to say, okay, it's nice to have MRI, but it costs maybe 400 euros. Is it worthwhile to really apply to so many patients? So those type of things we can consider. So okay, we did quite a lot of work on prospective validation as well. So we had, in that Predict ND project, we had 4 hospitals. So in Kuopio, in Finland, in Copenhagen, and in Amsterdam, and in Italy, in Perugia. So where we really said, okay, we collect 800 patients in total, and we follow them over time, and we have that tool, and we let clinicians make decisions like they are normally do, and then after some months we give them the same option, but then they can use that decision support tool. Let's see what the difference is. And of course, then you always have the problem, what is the right outcome? We don't know typically, but we follow the patients over quite a long time, which then gives us some kind of information about what the actual output was, even if in reality the actual class is only known after the person has died, but still after 24 months we can have a pretty good idea of what the final diagnosis is. So okay, what we were hoping is that it will really give a statistical improvement over accuracy, so having the tool available versus not having it available. Actually, we couldn't show that in this study there. So there is no statistical significant difference, even if it's improved a little bit. It's not statistically different, but what we did actually notice, so we had, of course, our numerical performance assessment, but we also asked clinicians, okay, how sure are you of your decision? Are you totally sure, or are you just guessing, or is it really impossible to determine? And those type of things actually have improved, and that's one of the things that it's really where we were aiming on, is really improving the, let's say, the confidence in decision making. So helping as a tool for decision making. So that's the let's say the positive type of output there. So it's really developing classifiers, but there are many ways to use them, and classification performance is just one part of the coin. We have cost effectiveness, we have understanding what kind of tests are useful when, and we have really supporting the, let's say, the decision-making confidence. And it's especially interesting and needed if we say, okay, we have expert clinicians of which there are only a few available, but we have junior clinicians who are not sure yet at making decisions, and how can we assist them? That's perhaps the most important contribution there. And exactly, it's very much similar to the next example that I show very quickly then, regarding traumatic brain injury, where we say, okay, we have another difficult decision support problem, people getting in accidents. So it can be a car accident, or if you have bad luck, you might just fall, or you have maybe some kind of moped, or those type of fast steps, things going over the street, and you hit your head, or you play certain sports. There are many ways you can hit your head, and it's quite often very difficult to say how serious this is. It may look very innocent at this moment, but actually it can develop into something very, very much different after a few days. So people having traumatic brain injuries and presenting themselves at the emergency room, and then a doctor having to decide whether this is something serious, yes or no, is really a tremendously difficult problem. It's actually much more difficult than the dementia case that I showed there. So it may be so that the person just was in an accident and he is in the hospital and he says, okay, I'm fine, but then after 3 or 4 days there might be some internal bleeding that actually has such a high pressure that it can be even fatal in the worst case scenario. On the other hand, sometimes it may look very bad, but then it turns out to be a minor head injury. So there we had the problem, okay, we have persons in the emergency room, we measure maybe CT scans, sometimes MRIs, we have knowledge about what was the accident, we have knowledge about the age. How can we then decide whether this person is safe to operate? If it's, for example, a car accident, he or she might have a broken arm or broken legs. Is it a good idea to do that kind of operation, or is it too risky if the head injury is there at the same time? Should we wait? Should we not wait? Should we send the person home? Those type of decisions are really extremely complex. And there, of course, it's how an injury will develop over time is related to the injury itself, but that by itself is a very heterogeneous thing. But also there are all things that affect the outcome that actually are not really directly related to the person. So if you happen to hit your head at night and you end up in a hospital where there's no staff available, it may take hours before somebody takes a look at you, so the situation might get much worse than when you are living next to a university hospital where you can get immediately expert help. So those type of things actually they affect the outcome, and it's really difficult to take those type of factors into your modeling. So it's really a rather complex approach, and it's one of those ongoing research which is really challenging. So we can, of course, there also use machine learning, AI models, but it really, again, has to be something that is trusted by clinicians. And what we did here in that project was really, again, looking at data, so retrospective data, collecting data, so images, MRI, CT, PET scans. We have blood samples that look at omics, genetic data to some extent. We had EEG data there measured from the people that were in the hospital in the intensive care unit. We had kind of experimental devices that were using impedance spectroscopy, and we had novel measures of measuring intracranial pressure. That is a very important variable to measure if there are internal bleedings that actually may be fatal, so then you need to do something. So predicting those type of things is important. So there it's a similar type of thing that I just showed in the dementia case, lots of heterogeneous data, and we would like to combine it and do some analysis there. So what we did here is that we followed patients, and in this example we had patients in the hospital and we followed what happened to them after 6 months. So there are certain scales, in this case the Glasgow outcome scale, which is a number between 1 and 5. 5 indicating that after those 6 months the person was again back at work and leading a normal life. 4 meaning that the person was okay but that not maybe 100% recovered. 3 meaning that the person actually had serious problems. 2 meaning that the person was in coma, and 1 meaning that the person didn't survive after 6 months. So then the question is, can we calculate those fingerprints at the moment when a person comes into the emergency room and then predict what actually the outcome is there? So this is a person actually that did completely recover, and you can see that in the emergency room it looked quite blue and quite positive. This person then didn't survive, and actually overall when we looked at the emergency room data, it actually already then looked pretty poor. So then it's just really interesting to see, okay, what kind of factors are there indicating in a certain direction. And again, these type of tools were especially for younger clinicians deemed very useful, who are not yet so much trained and haven't seen yet hundreds of patients during their life. And this was then also implemented in a software tool where we have interactive timelines that clinician can then scroll to and click on and then get those type of images that then do the online analysis, do segmentations, maybe look at how asymmetrical the brain is and calculate the area of asymmetry there and use that as a feature that is then input to that classifier, and those visualizations are then shown in parallel. So it's really an integrated type of approach there. So outcome prediction is one thing that I showed there, but actually the most relevant decision support thing for which we develop it is deciding whether it's a good idea to have operations there. So whether this person, for example, needs intracranial pressure monitoring, which is quite a big decision to make. So just to show that in principle that method that we have here is developed for decision support, but it doesn't really take very much, let's say, well, it's not really targeted at one specific disease. It's disease agnostic, if you want to say it like that. As long as you have lots of data available and you are able to group it into certain groups, then you can make these type of things relatively easily. And then, okay, things that we then run into when developing and discussing with clinicians is really, we can, of course, as data scientists, make all kinds of nice visualizations, nonlinear mappings, self-organizing maps, things like that, but we tried them, but they really don't really get accepted by clinicians. It's really quite often that referring to time series, raw image data, those type of things are what they are used to see, and they would like to see those always. So it's nice to have those fingerprints there, but really details on demand is one essential thing there. So for example, this type of version that we have of a prototype, this type of picture here in which we show the trade-off between deciding between disease A and disease B, having the index value of disease A and the index value of disease B as some kind of two-dimensional picture, and having other classifications of similar patients' data around it. It really takes a lot of work to explain here as well as to doctors, and even then it's not clear what actually is happening there. So those type of things is nice scientifically, but it's not going to fly in an actual clinical application there. So those type of things, we had quite a lot of workshops and user development experts involved that were interviewing clinicians and say, okay, does this work, and can you understand this? And then if it didn't really work, then we find out something else. Then, okay, some experiences with that very much to what Natalie already mentioned this morning. So it's nice to do machine learning and modeling, but getting things really accepted in real life is actually the most of the work. So getting new data is horribly expensive, like we saw this morning earlier already. Sometimes people have nice retrospective data available, but how can you share it, regardless of whether people want to share it? There's all kinds of issues regarding formats, security issues, different equipment. So MRI scanner A versus MRI scanner B has different type of properties that you somehow need to deal with. So there's all kinds of technical things there. From a classifier development point of view, we have, of course, the issue that our data sets are highly imbalanced, so the majority might be Alzheimer's dementia, and then we have a few cases with vascular dementia. How can you develop then a classifier that is actually taking into account those vascular cases, right? And more importantly, how do you use validations independent? It's nice to have train and test sets, but you need to have really independent testing on prospective data, and collecting those rare cases is really quite an issue. Regulatory issues we already mentioned earlier. I would also like to mention here culture. So it's really not so easy to just go as an engineer to a hospital and say, okay, I have this very fancy classifier, just use it. I mean, there's really many people that you really need to discuss with, and they need to understand you need to understand them. Clinical partners usually speak a different language than engineers, so that it really requires a long-term investment and getting to know each other and really trust each other over the long term. So just as an example, this screenshot here from that startup spin-off company that we have actually took 3 EU projects, but plus quite a lot of own projects in succession, around 8 years before you have something that is actually then sellable as a service. So this picture here, I already said it, we are there, but we are really depending very much on interaction there, but on a wider scope, I would say it's really many more stakeholders that we have. So generating impact, if we have our successful decision support solution, what it's supposed to generate value or impact. Okay, we have our scientific community that gets increased knowledge. We have maybe doctors here that are helped with improved decision making, but also, of course, we have industry that might increase competitiveness. We have society which will benefit from reduced costs. Maybe the people at home will have improved quality of life. So there's actually many people that have interest in solving this thing, and that's really, if we want to develop something that works and is accepted and has value, then all those people need to work together. So that's the main message. I think that in reality, if you want to create novel solutions, you really have to have projects that include companies, universities, but also patient organizations, and not only patient organizations, but people that take care of patients at home, maybe the spouse, children, that all actually are very much affected by how a disease progresses. So it's actually many different users that you have to take into account. Okay, with this picture, I'll leave the floor open for questions or comments.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. There are some questions. Okay, yeah.
Hello, thank you very much for your presentation. So actually I'm working on also in a similar project. So we're working in the ICU and we try to give warnings or predict some critical conditions arising in the ICU. And by the project proposal, we don't have, for example, imaging data. We only have like time series, routinely measured variables. And the question is like that. So did you evaluate which value, which data adds more value for your prediction? For example, do like imaging, you also had some dementia tests and everything. Can you comment on that?
So you mean that if I have an EEG, what would be the extra value of adding?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so that's actually one example that actually I didn't really have time to go into that, but actually this is what you could do, so you can actually click add or remove those type of things as you would like to do interactively and see what the performance then is. So actually it's a very important thing, because quite often we would like to say, okay, we can do a cognitive test for everybody because it just is an interview and you can do it in maybe 20 minutes. That has a certain accuracy. Okay, it's maybe not that good, but it doesn't cost much. So okay, what would be the next test that makes sense? Is it MRI, which is then maybe 400 euros, or can we maybe do some blood test, which is maybe less? So actually, we are able to really quickly check what the added accuracy is, and we have also knowledge of the costs of those different tests. So it's one part of the whole idea of saying, okay, what would be the next useful test to add if you start with something basic?
Can I have one more follow-up?
Yeah.
Yeah, and one more question, like, because in intensive care database, there's some open source OpenX databases, and they're like golden standard of ICU data, and all the researchers more or less validate to publish, you have to use them more or less, because your own data is good, what you have in the hospital, but it's kind of, tricky to publish, and you have to validate. So how is it in your case, and how complicated is to get this data, and are there some open access databases for in your research?
Yeah, I guess you are referring to the mimic database especially. So it's true that it's a nice reference because everybody knows it. On the other hand, it has the danger that people start basically overtraining over it if everybody in the world is starting just to use the mimic data, and then only the best models are getting published there. So I would certainly see that the mimic data or any other database is certainly good for having the baseline system and referring it, comparing it to others. But in the end, the only way to prove that it really does something in practice is by collecting prospective data. And of course, you need to carefully describe what you do, that you need to really do it with clinicians together and not as an engineer only and say we collect some data. But it's really to those examples of project that I showed, so to put it into context, that PREDICT-AD project that we had as first, we started it maybe some 9 years ago. Actually, it was very easy because it only worked with retrospective open data. So there's the ATNI database regarding dementia, which is comparable to that mimic. So there we said, okay, we develop a system, we use databases that are existing in the world that everybody knows, and then we see how it works, and it turned out that it looked really promising. So that's nice, you can publish about that, but then the big question is, okay, how does it now work in real life? So for that, you really need to have that PREDICT-ND project, for example, where we did nothing more than actually doing a prospective study. We did some tweaking to the algorithms, but actually not so much anymore. So it was really a research project meant for validation on new data. So I would say that the open data is certainly good, and it gives you a flying start to get things up and running. But if you really want to prove in the end whether it makes a difference, it is real life data. But not only in your own hospital, it really then should be several hospitals in different countries, because there are different ways of doing things with different personnel and different practices. So that's an issue there. Yeah.
Yes. So thanks for the talk. I'm really interested in the combination of human and machine intelligence, and how the system of the human working with this can be more accurate in that diagnostic, for instance. And there, I'm really something that I would like to ask you is about how do you balance this idea of having something that is not a black box with something that is easy to understand. So in my experience, depending on the type of customer of a machine learning system, some customers really don't want to see the complexity. They want you to hide as much as possible and give them only the output.
Yeah.
I guess the medical doctors you work with, they want to be exposed to some aspects of the model, but not to all, or maybe to nothing. And moreover, maybe what they say they want to see is not what's lead to the best decision for them.
Yeah.
So how do you balance this thing between let's say having a black box and having something that's easy to understand? That's my question number one. My question number two is whether you saw that you could improve the confidence of the medical doctors in wrong decisions, which I think I would like you to say something more about that.
One. Yeah.
Thanks.
So okay, the first question is there are certainly some decisions in which perhaps doctors say, okay, I don't need some explainability. So a good example is, for example, AI methods that are now getting lots of FDA approvals around the world that are related to image processing. So their idea is, okay, we have a certain task, which is a well-described task. We need to do automatic image quantification. And for example, that's sort of convolutional neural network there. It's of course a black box type of thing, which was developed by Daniel Rückert, who was here on Tuesday. So it's really part of the feature extraction chain, if you want to say it like that. So in that sense, many doctors would say, okay, I don't care how you calculate it, as long as the output is correct, and then I'm happy with it. So that's perfectly acceptable there. On the other hand, if you go to those higher level type of decisions, where then it's say, okay, do we need to decide between disease A or disease B, which is really at the very end of the processing chain, where doctors discuss with each other and say, okay, I think that this is this, or I think that is that, then it's really important to have insight in what those things are. So actually, I didn't have time to show, but we actually did two-dimensional disease state indices where we had, for example, vascular dementia and things like mixed dementia, and show them on 2 dimensions to doctors. And actually several times they really said, okay, this, I first thought it was this, but now it looks like if I look at this and this, it might actually be a mixed case. So there's really the kind of discussion that you are generating, saying, okay, this classifier suggests this, does it make sense? Sometimes it does, sometimes it's just nonsense, but yeah, it's really, so I would say at a very high level decision making, where it's really a tool for making more informed decisions, there it's really important that you have explainability. So I think it really depends on where you are in the processing chain. And at that second question, that some people were more confident in making the wrong decision. Well, it's actually a known thing. I don't know if you. So there's Eric Topol, who has this nice book, which was just a few months published on AI in medicine. Actually, he made a very nice exposition that. Eric Topol, T-O-P-O-L. So actually, he's. So actually sometimes doctors are very sure about something very wrong. Those type of things you will always have. I'm not sure what we can do about that, but yeah, that's one thing that happens there, yeah.
Hi, thank you for the interesting talk. I would like to ask, it seems that especially for this kind of high-level decision, it's really important to understand where the model you have comes from. So I was wondering how, in your method, you deal with the problem of external validity. That is, you have a model with certain types of predictions and explanations, and if your population changes a lot, deviates a lot from the one that you use for training, how do you account for that? Yeah. And also, kind of related to that is, the focus of your product, is it more on the methodology or on the knowledge that you acquired, or a mix of both? And how is this idea of extrapolated explained in the product, or
So
thank you.
the first question is so if we have data, which is of course really, so we need to collect large databases, and it's really important to collect in many different hospitals with different devices to really get as big group as we can. So what we do is if we have a new patient coming in, we actually look at similar patients with respect, for example, to age and gender and certain other things like amount of education, which we know that actually are well grouping things together. And if there are only a few of those people in our databases that are comparable, we actually know that we have only a few comparable cases that are relevant to make decisions on. So actually that complex picture that I showed with those two things, which I said was too complex for doctors, which actually exactly tries to cover that kind of issue, that we say, okay, sometimes we are pretty sure because we have lots of data in the surrounding area, but sometimes we make a decision, but we don't have any example cases nearby, so we can give an output, but actually we just have to say honestly that there is not much corresponding data. So that's actually one thing that we try to introduce there, but it's a pretty complex thing to explain to users. So then that second issue that you had is, I think it's the main message here of those methods is of course, I would say having a decision support system that works in real life. So those, whoops, oh, where is it? So these type of things are kind of things that we say, okay, these are what we would like to address. So there's hundreds of machine learning and AI methods in the world, but not all of them address all of those different things, whereas the methods that we are trying to develop actually really aim to have to solve all those things there. So that's the general aim that we set out here.
So,
yeah.
Thanks for the impressive talk. First of all, I have a basic question. That in one of your example, you mentioned that professor has higher AD disease index. Professor has a 0.93 index, but other people, like you compare 4 people with different professions, at less than 0.5. So I'm just curious to know why professor has highest index.
Yeah, I don't know. Okay, I don't know. So he has just dementia disease, which has apparently, so okay, so what we can see here, so regardless of whether he's a professor or yes or no, so actually I got complaints from people that I shouldn't show this because actually this is, people might infer actually who this is if you have enough information there, but yeah, so this person has, unfortunately the dementia is really so much present that it's regardless of whether what his education was. So of course he's a retired professor, and we know that people that have many educational years actually have a so-called stronger buffer towards cognitive decline, because actually they really are able to do those memory tests longer relatively well than people have less years of education. So that's actually one thing that we try to normalize also for. But yeah, I don't know, it's just dementia affects everyone regardless of whether it's a professor or somebody else. So yeah.
We can move on to the
Yeah.
So yeah, time is flying, but discussion is good. So we'll take only 3 more questions. So here, and then Pablo, and then maybe we close it.
Okay, well, congratulations on developing a product that's being used. I think my question is mainly about usability and the clinical, like how does it integrate into the workflow? Me personally, I have some experience like working with some software for predicting and procedural outcomes and using software for image analysis, and my experience is as soon as it just expands the time for the clinician to put in just a little bit extra time, no matter how useful it may be, it may not be used that much. So how did you get any feedback from the clinicians? How does it integrate? How much time does it take?
You are 100% correct. If it costs 1 second more time, then it will not be used, regardless of how nice it is. So that's really why we had, those European projects were research prototypes that we developed, saying, okay, these are then interesting and clinicians got enthusiastic, but it's another thing then to say we need to integrate it in real life, because there you really have to make the connections to the patient health record systems and the PACS systems and whatever types of things that you have to really get it running. So that's Predict ND project that I mentioned, which we did a prospective study, actually spent not so much time on scientific development, but actually especially on those type of nasty things that are maybe not scientifically very interesting, but nevertheless crucial if you want to have something there. So it's true that if you want to develop a successful product, then you really have to allocate lots of researches to dealing with different databases and protocols and getting permissions and whatever types of things there are. So it's a big part of the work.
So how much time does it take to check if the patient where the patient is by your prediction?
Well, basically, if I would say, if you really want to make a report, we are talking in the order of minutes. And it's in this case okay, because it's not a routine type of thing that a nurse needs to do in an intensive care unit and get a result in seconds, but it's more like minutes that we have here.
Okay, thanks for the talk now. So following up on the earlier question on patient variability, you also have a lot of variability in all of the measurements that you're showing and differences in how all of those measurements are done, especially when you start to collect, the 100 measurements that you have shown on the screen. Do you take the variability in how those measurements are done into account in your model at all?
Yeah, otherwise you are basically classifying from which hospital you have been measured instead of... So actually the good example is, for example, metabolomics, that we looked at, okay, certain biomarkers from blood. Actually they are, some of them are promising biomarkers for development of dementia, but what we there then had the problem was that different labs in different hospitals where they were analyzed, they were really having such different signatures that in effect what we could see is that we made a classifier, but what the only thing that the classifier would output is saying, okay, this has been measured in hospital A or hospital B or hospital C, which is really not what you would like to have. For example, for imaging inputs, we have, of course, our harmonization methods and transform it to similar spaces, but it depends from biomarker to biomarker how much you can do about it. So in fact, the metabolomics in this case we just couldn't use because it was impossible to correct for. So it was a nice study, but the paper that we there published was basically saying, okay, we have different variables for different hospitals, and it's not really something that you can merge together for overall classification. But for other variables, you can take that into account, trying to harmonize it if you know the properties of the devices or the certain methods that you have. So there is not one answer. I think it's more from biomarker to biomarker or measurement to measurement how much you can do there. But it's essential to be aware of it. And of course you need to check those profiles for each hospital and see how much they are different between locations. Yeah.
So then what's your feeling on that versus making the model repeatable across the world, across whatever the input is?
So the only way of making it repeatable is collecting an enormous amount of data and really trying to integrate as much. So it's really important to really be part of big networks. So it's one area, for example, a concrete example is, okay, we have our European implementation there, but if we go to Asia, we know that the brain structures and volumes of different organs are actually different. So then the only way to say, okay, we want to go to the Asian market is to get data from Asian databases, which then you need to do via network. So it's the only way there is to collect data. Of course, you can say, okay, maybe we can make extrapolations and make some kind of models that try to cover for everything, but in practice, it's by definition, those type of machine learning methods, they work if you have as much data as possible. So it's really essential to work not only in Europe, but we have then US databases, we have Australian databases, we have databases in Asia, and it's really tricky to collect, but it's the only way to do it. It's also the reason why we had in that prospective study, we had 4 hospitals throughout Europe to at least say something about the generalizability there.
But I think this is very crucial, because what you see is, you mentioned it already, for example, different manufacturer scanners will give different results. Then different hospitals will give different results. In different countries it will be different. What is even important, depending on when you go for surgery and things like that, surgeons give different results. So, and one of the things, and I think this is crucial in machine learning, is like, if you want to have it into a clinical decision making, you have to use the parameters that clinicians are using. And actually many of these are implicit. So a clinician knows the value of their surgeon. A clinician knows how good their lab is and not, and they take that into account. So this is something that we really have to find methods to explicitly take into account. We cannot just ignore it, and this is becoming more and more important. We have been ignoring it because it wasn't important, but we really have to look at how do clinicians make decisions, which are the variables they really use, which is how implicit are they using variability, for example, because they will say, if you look in cardiology and ejection fraction, they will kind of round it off towards the direction that they want to round it off. So all these things have to be taken into account.
Thanks a lot for the excellent journey that you have traveled, and I think it must feel quite fulfilling. But I was intrigued in all this decision tree. All seems to be data-driven, and in one of the initial slides, you had a bit the complementarity value between data-driven and knowledge-driven or mechanistic models. Are any of these numbers in the current decision tree in the area of application that you work based on the knowledge that if I combine this aspect with that other aspect, I come up with a much more robust number? Or how much of the decision engine is only based on learning on this data, or is based on the mechanistic knowledge? Can you discuss a bit?
Yeah, so actually that would be a whole other presentation, and that was actually what especially that VPH there project was doing there. So there we had, I don't know how, I remember how Alex called it and stuff, but we had, let's say, the clinical decision support, and we had a research track where the models were in parallel going. So we had our data-driven and model-based driven, and basically models were then generating certain outputs, certain new biomarkers, certain new variables that were really giving information, and we actually then coupled those as input to those fingerprint 3D. So it was really an interactive. So there were two pipelines, and they were communicating with each other and adding new values there. So actually some of them were really improving performance, but of course it's really very much earlier work, I would say, because they were completely new variables. These things are all known to clinicians, and they can relate to them and they understand immediately what they mean. But certainly that was the whole idea there, that we have the models that really generate new ideas, new models, and we then input them to those fingerprints as extra novel features that then might improve the overall performance. So that was certainly the idea there, yeah. And actually it was implemented like that, and it really would be nice to continue that work, because it's...
But nothing yet reached the clinic?
It's not in routine use, it's really for the research prototype that we have there, yeah. But it would be fantastic to continue with a research project there, yeah.
Okay, so this was a very nice discussion. Thank you very much, Mark, for that.
Sure.